Hello, this is a new podcast called Ink and Ecstasy. We're a couple of friends who are looking forward to doing a deep dive into the world of writing erotica. We're planning to release at least 2 podcasts each month, probably more like 3 or 4. Some of these will be topics that we discuss on writing, our own, other people's, influences and things like that. But most of them will be reviews of stories that we have kind of forced each other to read. We are going to be sending stories back and forth to each other, reading them, then recording our thoughts on them. These are very off the cuff conversations. We're not scripting any of this or planning any of it ahead of time. And I mean, beyond what the topic is or what stories we're going to read. With that being said, let's get some introductions out of the way. I write under the name Lizette Monroe and go by the screen name Arrowzetta on various social platforms and websites. I started writing erotica as an outlet to practice character development and building interpersonal relationships. Things like emotions, building up emotions with words, and helping me to better connect myself to my own emotions. Somewhere along the way, I fell in love with the process and haven't drifted back to more mainstream works. There's just a complexity that I like exploring in erotica, and I hope that shows in my writing. And this is my co-host. He goes by the name D.E. Grimwood on Smashwords, and he's going to tell you a little bit about himself.
Hey, I've been reading erotica for about 10 years and writing for 1. I'm a fan of exhibitionism, bondage, and submission, but I guess I'm always trying to learn new kinks. Okay, so we're done with the introductions, yeah? Can we move on to the actual show?
Yeah, sure. And our topic for this week is why we read and write what we do. Or as my co-host just recently said, why we are such big perverts.
Yeah, okay. That's totally fine. We'll just go with that. All right. Wow. Why do we write what we do? I guess that I'm interested in fantastic ideas, I suppose you could say. I've always been fond of what I call forced closeness, like shared beds, sitting on laps, and stuff like that.
For me, it is just about getting the scenarios in my head out of my head so that I can sleep.
Yeah, that's really big, actually, because you get hit with an idea, or I do anyway, like right before I'm about to go to bed. Like I'm just like brushing my teeth, and I'm like, oh yeah, obviously, I'm going to need a vampire, right?
Naturally.
And then I'm like scrambling to get my phone, and I'm like making this real quick note, because then if I don't write it down to remind myself later to think about, then I'm just going to think about every other detail of the story,
Well, it's like when that happens with me, it's not always just before I go to bed. It could be that I started writing an idea hours beforehand, and when it's actually time to go to bed, I can't because they need me to keep writing. They're like bickering in my head, going, no, we need this to get out of, like, we need this done. This has to be written before you go to bed. You're not going to be able to sleep otherwise. And so I, like a slave, just sit there and type until they let me go to bed. That doesn't sound insane at all.
No, that makes perfect sense, actually. But I actually thought that you were talking about ideas and not writing.
It can be both.
So
it'll start with an idea, but then like it might be that the idea grows from when I started writing something, and the idea just morphs and it needs to keep going and keep going and keep going. And so it does. But like I said before, when I sit down to write, I don't have an idea usually. I just write.
So when you do have an idea, you've got to write it.
I gotta write it.
Okay, I see.
Otherwise, it just takes over everything.
Yeah, when I have been writing for hours, I don't ever feel compelled to stay up and continue writing.
uh, I do.
And maybe that's just me, but like if I've been writing like all day, I can very easily just go to bed.
I can sometimes, but there are times when the story won't leave me alone. It just keeps gnawing at me, and I will try to go to sleep and will wake up like an hour, maybe an hour and a half later, and realize, no, I have to keep writing because it's still going through my head. The conversations are still happening, the actions are still happening. I can still fucking see these people in my mind, and they won't shut up.
Right.
So I get up and I finish writing. It annoys the hell out of my husband.
Luckily, I am not plagued by that. But I guess I kind of have the opposite problem of whenever I'm actually trying to write, I'm getting ideas for like 15 other things, and I'm like, scrambling to take notes about all of them,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah,
So,
I'm usually pretty good at focusing on one because it's usually the loudest going on in my head. It's the one that like pushes everything else aside and makes me focus on it. That's usually the one I
mm,
get caught up in writing.
yeah, it's always nice when that happens and then nothing else gets in the way.
It can be nice, that's for sure.
Yeah.
I guess we have nothing else to say on that, so let's continue.
I think what I really like in a story is self discovery, you know,
Hmm.
like character development. When the characters are learning things about themselves, and while I'm reading or even writing, I can learn things about myself, like things I like, for instance, or maybe even writing styles, or just noticing themes or stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't think I have a whole lot of self discovery while I'm writing, but usually when I focus on a character, I can see a lot of myself in them, even if the situation is something that I'm not personally into. Um, but as far as like emotions and interactions with people and behaviors, I can learn a lot about myself from those interactions with my characters, I think, because there is a lot there that is reflective of my own experiences, whether intentional or not, I don't know. Sometimes it just happens. And I mean, sometimes it's about writing something cathartic for myself, getting thoughts out of my head and doing it in a way that lets me take it off of myself and put it onto this fictional character. Um, Lets me step outside and be sort of objective on the situation, which can give you a very unique perspective and some self reflection through that.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you're reading or writing, like you can, I guess, kind of get in the mind of someone that's not you,
Mm-hmm.
basically.
Yeah, I can see that. I think a big part of character development is how the characters interact with each other because how people interact is a big part of who they are. And I think it's the same with characters. How they treat another character is very reflective of who they are, regardless of what they might say is the main character or the narrator or whatever. How they actually interact with other people tells more about them than anything they actually say in the story.
Oh, yeah. It's kind of like how you can read a story and it might say in the very beginning, like, "Hi, my name's John. I love my wife very much," and blah blah blah, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like you can tell that through the dialogue and the narration without just coming right out and
Right.
saying it. Is that what you're
Yeah,
saying?
right. It's actually a good way to catch a unreliable narrator if it's the main character because their actions won't match up with what they're saying happened. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm. I'm gonna have to pay attention for that. I don't know that I have actually noticed that.
It can be really interesting.
If that's a story that wasn't really written very well, I might have dipped out before I even noticed.
I have read quite a few of those, so especially over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, yeah. Do you read those stories all the way to the end? Don't you dip out ever?
um, I mean, if it's bad enough, I'll dip out, or at the very least, skim.
Okay, yeah. I thought that we had talked about that and
Yeah,
that there were things that would make you dip out,
yeah. I mean, if the
primarily about
yeah,
style.
if the grammar and style is just atrocious, and I can't get through it, like I can't read it without thinking I'm absolutely tormenting myself for no reason. I will dip out
That
of
is
that
kind of what it
story.
feels like sometimes,
Yeah.
isn't it?
And what else can we talk about?
So when I first started reading erotica about 10 years ago, I don't know about you, but I had no idea at the time that I would develop an interest in the psychological aspect of sex, you know?
The psychological aspect. Yeah, that's good.
So, case in point, there was a time in my life when I saw a bondage picture for the very first time. Do you remember
Yeah,
this?
we
Do
talked
you,
about
do you
this.
remember? Well, you don't remember when that happened, like to me. But I'm asking, like, do you remember the first time that happened to you?
Oh, like it being exposed to something that I didn't know before.
Yeah.
Um, well, yeah, I've had quite a few instances of that over the years.
So the first exposure that I had to bondage was seeing a picture on the internet, and it was really shocking. I can't adequately express how shocked I was. My mind just reeled, and I just thought, "What the fuck?" And I don't know, something about it just repulsed me,
Oh, how times
kind of.
change.
And because that's like most of what I write about now. Um, but I think at the time, my problem with bondage was that I was assuming that it was strictly about dominance, right? And men just cruelly restraining women so they can have their way with them or whatever.
Yeah, there's so much more to it.
Yeah. And then when I started reading erotica, I actively avoided the BDSM category when I first started reading because I didn't know any better. It's like I just didn't know what any of the genres were all about,
Hmm.
because it's not like you're taught any of this stuff in school, right? And
I
so
hope not.
yeah, that would be a pretty fucked up
Yeah.
school. So in my mind, BDSM fit into non-con, and I wasn't having that at all. But we can come back to non-con later. And then one day, I don't know, I must have read like a exhibitionism story about a girl that becomes submissive for her friend or her group of friends or something, and then she gets handcuffed or something, or maybe it was like a self bondage thing. Um, it would have been something like that, when I learned about submission. And getting into that headspace allowed me to learn how to love bondage.
I'm trying to think. I think as far as bondage, I don't remember when I was first exposed to that. But the first time I really picked up on it and became interested in it as like reading material or writing material was when I came across a manga series called Nana and Kaoru. I know I mispronounced that and I apologize. But it came out like in 2008 ish, I think, and ran through like 2016. But it is about childhood friends and neighbors who the boy is kind of an outcast, a bit of a loser to most people, and the girl is like super high strung and the head of everything, super popular type person. So a complete mismatch in personality and social status and all that. But they were friends. They grew up neighbors and friends. And she is under so much pressure for as far as like school and life in general that she finds like comfort in their straining of bondage, and he decides to learn how to do bondage like shibari in order to get closer to her and to help her with that feeling, because it's about one of the only things she would have control over in her life, which is like full of school pressure and stuff like that. And I was just like, I was sucked into that manga like right away. And it's probably the only one I've ever read straight through that's not Death Note, which is not erotica. So, and this one really wasn't erotica either, but it's
Still a good story though.
yeah, this one wasn't erotica either, but it was very it took an erotic theme and made it about friendship and mental health. And I really appreciated that because there's no sex in that series until the very, very end. And it's only implied. So it's not even laid out, which is weird for a manga.
Okay, you're gonna need to share the name of that manga with
Nana
me.
and
All
Kaoru.
right. Yeah, if you could just
Text it.
spell
Yeah,
that
yeah.
and then just
I'll send it to you.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
I really liked it. But yeah, like that was the first time I really got into like reading bondage type things. I had always like kind of been interested in particularly like self restraint because I also found it very comforting in that way. It was a form of control, having control over something, at least to some degree, you know?
Yeah.
So for me, that was never necessarily about submission so much as it was comfort. There's something just extremely calming about being restricted like that, which I think maybe a lot of people don't understand. They think it is about submission and giving yourself over to somebody else, but it's not always about that. It's sometimes just for yourself. And I think that's an aspect that a lot of people miss, especially when they're first introduced, like you mentioned, to it, because it looks extreme.
Oh, for sure.
But once you get into the psychological aspect behind it for a lot of people, it becomes a lot more, to me, obvious what the appeal is. Like, there is some reassurance in, for one thing, having somebody in your life that you can trust enough to restrain you like that without worrying about them crossing lines or going past your limits and things like that. When you know you have somebody who is that respectful of you and can just be with you in the moment when you're having that little bit of control in your life, it can be extremely calming and reassuring, which I think is something that a lot of people would benefit from. Maybe everyone should be tied up in bondage at least once in their life, just to see if they might like it, just to see if they might get something out of it for their mental health.
Yeah, I can honestly say I do not want to be tied up.
I mean,
I don't. So,
so I mean,
um,
sometimes the tying up appeals to people, and sometimes it's just like I said, it's about wanting to have some sort of control over your life. That's a big part of what self bondage is, I think.
yeah, self bondage is where it's at. Like for real.
But it can be so hard to get the knots right. You can't do
I
full
mean,
shibari on yourself. It's impossible.
does it need to be rope though?
I mean, not necessarily, but there is something very constricting about rope that is very appealing,
Yeah, I can definitely get that.
especially well
And I
treated
even
rope.
touched on that well treated rope.
Uh-huh.
Huh. I'm gonna have to make a note of that and look into that. But
It's the when the rope is treated to be more pliable
oh,
and softer.
oh, right, yeah.
A fresh rope hurts, a treated rope, a
Ah,
broken in rope that has spent, years being used, that's the best.
okay. Yeah. So there were a couple of things that you mentioned about comfort, and then also about it's just something satisfying about feeling the rope. And it's so funny, right? Because like, okay, so I've never been tied up, right? But I've been able like I have been able to like put myself in that headspace and just imagine what it's like and what the motivating factors are. And that's honestly where like most of my stuff has come from.
Yeah, you did that really well with Found Fun.
Yeah, that was what I was going to mention. Yeah, like some of that stuff, I'm like, I don't even know where the fuck it's even coming from. Like sometimes I don't even have to think about it at all. I'm just like, oh yeah, she would struggle because she would like it.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah,
sometimes that's something that a lot of people overlook when they do bondage writing is that the struggle isn't always about defiance or standing up to the person who's tying you up. It is because it feels good.
yeah, and like I said, I have no idea where some of that stuff comes from sometimes,
I
but
mean, I'm sure it comes from observing and listening.
I mean, maybe I guess there's some implicit learning going on while I'm reading all these
Right.
stories, I
You
guess.
probably pick
And
up
it's
on
just
subtle
being,
things.
yeah, and then it's just being tucked away somewhere in the back of my mind. And then I'm just accessing it later.
Right.
So, was there any other, type of stories that involved a psychological component to it that you've taken an interest in?
Dullification.
Yeah. Well, that is that is rather extreme, but
I
I will give that one to you.
yeah, I
That one is
didn't even know it
that
existed
one's pretty
until
awesome.
like, oh, actually I take that back. I've kind of known it existed for a
Not
while,
even not even a year.
but
Oh,
yeah,
really?
I've known of it, and I have. I mean, I wrote a poem about being a marionette from the marionette's point of view.
Oh
So I
yeah,
mean,
I read that one.
and I have a story that I'm working on that expands on that poem. That is from the marionette's point of view. So yeah, there. But that's a different, I guess, type of dollification because it's not a flesh and blood person being turned into a doll. It is a doll turning into a flesh and blood person.
That's really making me think some stuff there.
No
Um,
new ideas
well, no, no. I mean, it's not an idea for a story, but it's an idea for something else, though.
for something else.
And yeah, I'm just kind of wondering because there was this one story that I read one time involving dollification,
Mm-hmm.
and I talked to that author, and he said it was a request, and then it wasn't an interest of his.
Uh-huh. And he did a damn good job with it. I know exactly what you mean.
And I'm just wondering who could have requested that story.
It wasn't me. I found it after he wrote it.
Oh, is that
Yeah, I
right?
did not like when I read that.
Oh, that was actually, yeah, so that was before. Right,
Yeah,
yeah.
I when I read that, it was it was me thinking, "Oh, new kink unlocked." But no, it's actually something I have thought about before and I forgot until like just now because I remembered things.
Yeah. When you said new kink unlocked, I kind of imagined being on the Xbox and then
One of the
you like make some
like
discovery and then
trophies.
and then it says achievement unlocked.
Same idea. I game, so
Yeah.
yeah, those kind of things come to mind. But yeah, no, when I read it was not me that requested that. I just really, really liked that story.
Okay.
And I only read it
Okay.
after it was already published. Because I only met him late last year. or like mid last year, I guess. But yeah, that story then, yeah, that reminded me of some things.
Yeah, that kind of reminds me. There were a few other scenarios or genres, tropes, whatever you want to call them, that I've you know taken a liking to, or like kind of discovered along the way through reading and having ideas and
Mhm.
stuff that I've taken a liking to. So there's this one particular type of forced closeness story, like nurse stories, but not actual nurses. I'm talking about people that are taking on nurse roles,
Right.
right? For like a friend or a family member, or uh, if the character is especially lucky, like a next door neighbor or something like that. But funnily enough, I haven't written anything like that yet. I don't think. I think I have a couple of ideas that I've fleshed out somewhat, but I haven't yet been grabbed by any of them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm trying to think if I have anything along that lines because I kind of feel like I probably would because that is something I actually have real life experience with. Not on the erotic side, but on the actual people treating me like I'm a nurse side of things. I
Uh
don't know
huh.
why. Like my mother-in-law would come to me with all kinds of medical questions and like I had to keep reminding her, like, I'm not a doctor. Like, you know that, right? I'm not a nurse. Just because I have like some leftover medical knowledge from high school does not make me qualified to answer these questions or to help you with these things. But yeah, like I'm surprised. I'd be surprised if I don't have one sitting around somewhere about that because that is something I've done to a degree. So I would have a inside take on being the nurse.
Yeah. Oh yeah, but actually, what reminded me about these other, kind of tropes or whatever, is there are some quasi forced situations, kind of like self bondage or exhibitionism predicaments. Those are great. And then there's also, like medical and like research kind of
Mm-hmm.
stuff where it's like people like volunteering for, some kind of study or something. Well, I don't know. Maybe you haven't.
Um, I I mean, I know a little bit about it. I haven't read extensively in that area. Again, probably because it's something that I'm personally familiar with and I would see all the flaws. Because when
Uh,
that kind of thing does come up, the medical side really matters to me. Like when they get minor things wrong, it kind of pisses me off.
I'm a really big fan of when reading or in writing. If it's about something, in a really technical field, just like one line of dialogue or narration saying, but he understood that they weren't professionals and that this was like some side gig that they were doing. You know what I'm
Right,
saying?
something to
Like that just goes such a long way, so that like you don't have to have this super high expectation
right,
of like everything being perfect,
right. Because like if you know that it's just a hobby, you know they're gonna fuck up at some point, and you can be a little more forgiving of that. But when you say that someone is like has been an RN for 20 years and, top of their field.
And they're like a medical researcher, and
Right.
yeah.
And they get something basic thing wrong that somebody who never went to nursing school and only did school, like classes on nursing in high school, knows that they did wrong. That's a problem.
Yeah,
That's poorly researched. And that's going to piss me
right, right.
off. And I will call
Yeah,
it out. Like, that's the kind of thing that really irritates me because it's bad medical advice
yeah,
too. Because people might read that and be like, oh, I wonder if I can actually do that. And the answer is no, never do anything you read in a story, please.
yeah. There have been, well, not necessarily in any type of like medical story specifically, but I know that there have been some stories where where I've read one line and I was just like, no, I'm out. Because like the entire suspension of disbelief is just blown.
Yeah.
And I may have loved the story entirely up to that point, and it might be like, 90% of the way through the story. And the two main characters are just getting down to bang. And then it's just one line. And then I'm just like, that was so close. I'm just like, that sucks. You know?
Yeah, usually for me, that comes up when they get female anatomy grotesquely wrong. Again, that irritates me a lot, and that's the kind of thing that I just like am no. Nope, that did it. That just ruined every little bit of suspension of disbelief I had. This is not an alien race, so goodbye.
Yeah, but I have found over time that I prefer stories with female main characters because their self discovery process is more interesting to me.
I can see that. I don't think I have a preference either in reading or writing. I have stories that are from the male perspective as well as the female and from third person and like yeah, I go all across things with that. The only thing I will never do is present tense. I promise.
You don't say.
Yeah, I can't stand reading it. I can't stand writing it. Kudos to those who can and can do it well, but I'm probably not ever going to read it because it just drives me nuts. I will listen to it. A present tense story in like an audiobook format, I can do that. That's not a problem. It's like somebody is telling me the story as it happens. I can get down with that, you know? But reading it is like giving myself a lobotomy. It is
Gosh.
just bad.
Okay. But yeah. So sometimes I'll look into a topic like spanking just to see what it's about. And then I find that I can enjoy it. But I never knew that I would until I read about it and learned what it's all about. What about you? Do you have any thoughts on spanking that you'd like to share with the class?
No.
Well, well, come on. I mean, this is supposed to be a conversation.
Okay, yeah, like the spanking stories are right up my alley. I like them, usually.
And
And what? I already admitted to bondage and self bondage in this.
well, I'm just saying that was really brief. That was a really short response.
um, I don't know. I have a lot of interests and kinks, and we would be here all night if I got into them. Um, but spanking does appeal to me. There's something in the power dynamic, in the closeness of it, in the intimacy of it. Yeah, it's appealing. Plus, it's a little. How do I put it? Not infantilizing, but I guess diminishing the feeling of my own power. And sometimes I like that. It can be nice to step back from feeling like I have to be in control all the time. Because in a lot of my regular day to day life, I do feel like that. I feel like there's a lot on me all the time as far as work and stuff like that. It feels like everybody looks to me for things like that. And so, yeah, spanking can kind of subvert that feeling and make it easier for me to um, let go of that need for control in day to day life and let me relax, which is a weird thing to say, but that's how it works for me.
I probably need to read more spanking stories because I don't know that I've really read enough from the woman's point of view. You know what I mean? Like I think I've read maybe like one decent one.
Yeah, they're kind of rare from the woman's point of view. Maybe I should write one.
I mean, there are some, but like, most of the ones that I see are really like most of the time they're in lesbian sex, right? Or maybe it'll be in like BDSM and it's lesbians.
Right.
You know, it's always lesbians wanting to get spanked.
I mean,
I, I don't know why. I mean, I guess if you want to indulge in a safe way and give up control, then why not do that with your girlfriend?
right. And plus, like, women's hands are nice and soft and delicate. Kind of feels nice.
Okay, well, that is the teaser right there. Um, did you have anything else you wanted to add on the
Of
subject?
spanking?
Yeah.
um, just that you've got me thinking about writing a story about it now from the woman's perspective that is not a lesbian scene, but I am kind of considering it for maybe that would bring me back to lit and get me to post on Omen's event for next year. A spanking story from the woman's point of view. That's female empowerment, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, the event, Pink Orchid. That's the name of the event. If for anybody interested, it usually runs sometime in February, and the finalist is always put up on March 8th, which is International Women's Day.
Okay.
Not that I'm
Cool.
plugging that event. I like the event. It's a really good event.
Well, speaking of female empowerment, uh, non-con.
Perfect
So,
transition.
um, so yeah, with non-con, that's just I don't know about you, but that's really hard for me to get into.
Nope.
But I have learned a few ways in. All right, primarily with con non-con,
Consensual, yeah.
which yeah, but still, even that, most of the time, it's just consensual role play.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? And it's like, yeah, but it's just role
Yeah,
play.
it's a game.
It's like it's like I don't know. To me, I don't want to be reminded that the fantasy is a game while I'm reading. You know what I
Right,
mean?
yeah, I get that.
Like like I'm already having to employ suspension of disbelief. If you start talking about how it's a game, it's really testing that like mental shield that I have up, you know? And then there's also dubcon or dubious
Right.
consent.
I like dubious consent a lot.
Yeah, so this is where the guy thinks that he has consent, but he really doesn't. And I don't know. I suppose the roles could be reversed.
Yeah, or the girl thinks that she has been pretty clear that she has not given consent, but the waters are murky.
Yeah,
And maybe her ability to be like, hang on, wait a minute, has been taken away to a degree.
yeah, kind of like bound fun.
Yeah, kind of like that.
Yeah. Well, not kind of.
Definitely like that.
Yeah.
But like as far as non-con, like it can be such a divisive concept. But I personally know of a lot of women who write non-con as both cathartic outlets for their own lived experiences and to kind of subvert subvert the genre to a degree in turning non-con into things like femdom and getting revenge on people who, commit rape and things like that, or sexual assaults and other such things. But there are also a lot of women who enjoy the fantasy of being taken or forced to a degree. And I know many of them who do. And I think it is unfair to demonize an entire genre because of a few, or maybe even many, bad players within it. It can be difficult to write in that genre because the people who read it can be very particular about what they want. And if you don't live up to that, it can be a little hard to accept that, maybe your non-con isn't what they see as non-con. But at the same time, like I said, there are a lot of women who get enjoyment out of that genre, and I don't think it's fair to demonize it as a whole because there are some people, because let's face facts, in every single genre, there are people who will twist the intent of the genre into something it's not meant to be in order to get off to it.
You mean people that are writing the stories,
Writing or reading,
or people that are reading it?
Writing or reading. Some people will try to turn non-con into a full-on brutal rape story, which in my opinion is not what it's meant to be. It is meant to be something where hesitance and resistance are the primary drivers, not necessarily force or violence. I think there's no real place for violent non-con in erotica, but where that line is drawn between, violent erotic, violent non-con, and just forceful non-con, it's a murky line. And I know a lot of women who write it for cathartic reasons, like I said, and they shouldn't be shunned for that. They should be able to do that and embrace that without being made to feel like shit because they have an interest in something that they're being told they shouldn't have an interest in.
Well, in my opinion, people shouldn't be told what their opinions should be, or their likes or their dislikes. So.
Yeah, that is also a thing.
But that's really interesting that that you should say that about not liking violent, forceful non-con, right? Because I'm pretty sure you liked my story reviving a kid.
Yeah, I've written violent non-con myself. Doesn't mean I like it.
Yeah.
But sometimes, okay, the thing about reviving a kitten is it's not violent in the way it was written. You can see that the intent behind those words were meant to be, very forceful and to borderline violent, but it's not being depicted as sexualizing real rape. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
And I think that's where the line is when you have characters who could or are likely to be in real life in a situation that is likely to mirror real life in an outcome that mirrors real life.
Right.
That to me is taking it too far. I won't fault anyone for doing that because it's not my place. But personally, I can't read that kind of story because it creates a sort of visceral reaction in me that kind of makes me want to throw up. But at the same time, like, I have no problem with people writing it or reading it. It's just not my thing, and it's something I would prefer the genre to be without, but not something I would mandate because I don't think restricting creativity is the way forward.
Absolutely. I mean, people can write whatever they want to write,
Right.
in my opinion. And I know there's some really fucked up things that people can write, and a whole bunch of those don't ever see the light of day.
Yeah.
But yeah, with the reviving a kitten story, I didn't really know how to explain why it was okay in my mind. And I was actually thinking about it earlier, and I thought maybe it's because it's in a fantasy setting.
That is a big part of
Maybe
it.
that's it.
That is a big part that separates it from me because it is clearly meant to be full non-con, but it's in such a fantastical setting and written in such a I don't want to say distant, but like observational way
Right.
and a disconnected way that
Yeah.
it doesn't come across as hard non-con. Like, it doesn't come across as
Yeah.
violent non-con. But that's just my opinion. But it is still non-con, so
Yeah. I still can't believe that story is only 2,400
yeah,
words. I was looking at it earlier, and I was like, how the heck did I do
you
that
told a lot of
in only
story.
2,400
Yeah,
words?
you told a lot of story in that small amount of space.
Yeah. So, in preparing for this podcast, it occurred to me that I pretty much only like stories where there's zero chance of it ever happening to me personally. It's, I mean, it, it honestly, it kind of takes a lot for me to like a story that's actually realistic, like in such a way that it could conceivably happen to me at some point in the future. Those are me liking stories like those are actually kind of rare.
Yeah, I don't think I put that much thought into it, to be honest. I either like a story or I don't. I don't think I consider whether it could actually happen to me or not. Because ultimately, for me, it doesn't matter.
I get what you're saying, and like all I was saying was that like I didn't really think about that until recently when I was like preparing for
Mm-hmm.
this, and just because I'm like always thinking about what I like and what I dislike, and if the belief that I have about X is actually valid. You know what I'm saying? So I mean, like I'm always like thinking about things and just breaking them down and analyzing them, and I mean, I don't know. I'm introspective like that.
Yeah, for me, as far as when it comes to reading or even writing, I don't I don't put a whole lot of thought into that initially. I don't know, I either like the topic or I don't. I either enjoy it or I don't. And I don't know if I will or I won't until I've read it. I'm very much a not, don't go into reading something with a preconceived notion of whether I'm going to like it or not, because I'm usually disappointed when I do that. Like, if I go into something and it's like full on Dungeons and Dragons, it's supposed to be super involved, very well written fantasy, and it does not live up to that, I'm going to be sorely disappointed. Versus a story that touts itself as mild fantasy with, you know, tabletop role playing game elements. There's a lot more room for interpretation there, and when it comes to reading it and it lives up to that, I will remember that story. It will stick with me. But like,
Yeah, totally.
as far as whether or not I think it would be something that could happen to me or not, I don't think that really plays into it at all for me. I'm trying to think of an example, but I can't right now because I tend to lean into fantasy and sci-fi when I read, or erotic horror, and I really hope none of those happen to me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't think of any offhand where I didn't enjoy something just because it's something that could realistically happen.
Well, I'm not saying that I don't enjoy stories where they could realistically happen to me. I'm just saying that those are less common for me to
Right.
enjoy.
Yeah, I don't think that's ever been a factor when choosing something to read for me. And I don't think it's ever been a factor after having read something. Like it's not something I've ever really thought about, to be honest.
Okay, well, that's about all the time we have for this week. So,
I have a quick question for you.
what's that?
Do you actually get off on the stories you read and write?
Uh, do I get off on the stories I read and write? Um, it's it's not a requirement for me to enjoy the story. Um, well, we're out of time,
No, no, no,
folks.
no, no. I've
But
admitted
tune
to
in next
too
time
much.
when we'll be talking about something interesting. I'm sure.
Mm-mm. I've admitted to too much in this podcast. You're going to admit to something too.
Is this thing on? Okay. Now that she's gone, I gotta tell you to hit the notification bell and all that stupid shit. Okay. Well, thanks for listening and making it all the way through our first podcast. Every Thursday, we'll be discussing a topic like we did tonight, or a review for a story, or something else that we'll figure out at a future time. Don't forget to check out our work and our website at inkandecstasy.com. And you can always join our Patreon, where there's no telling what you'll find. Link in the description below. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.